Hi everybody, and welcome to today's Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll Technical Assistance webinar. Today our speakers are going to be staff from the Corporation for National and Community Service and the U.S. Department of Education. I want to cover a couple of housekeeping points before we get going. We love for the webinars to be interactive. So please, at any point during the presentation, use the Q&A feature at the lower left-hand corner of your screen to ask questions. Also, this is a reminder that all of our webinars for Honor Roll, both our webinars from December and our two webinars in February, are going to be posted to the application site, and the PowerPoints will be emailed to all of the participants. So if you feel like you've missed anything, all of the content will be sent to you. In addition, on the website, at the end of the webinar, we will have an FAQ, Frequently Asked Questions document, to answer all of the questions we received during the webinar. And with that, I would like to introduce Rob Beasy from the Corporation for National and Community Service.
Thank you, Ned. First of all, I'd just like to thank all of our federal and nonprofit partners that are involved with the Honor Roll. They help us in many ways, providing outreach and other kinds of help with the Honor Roll. This webinar today is designed to assist institutions of higher education to complete their application to the President's Honor Roll. While there is no recipe for writing a winning application, the information provided over the next hour will provide your institution with guidelines and tips to help your institution strengthen its application. Today, we will provide a brief review of the Honor Roll, outline the application review process, which includes a compliance check, institutional supports for service, the institutional commitment to service statement, and project narratives. We will also discuss some strategies that will help to strengthen your Honor Roll application and help you get your institution on the Honor Roll. These strategies include a discussion about what counts as service and building a team to help you to capture and gather all of the information. And finally, we will be reviewing important dates and deadlines. The President's Honor Roll recognizes institutions for their commitment and engagement in high-quality community service and service learning that meet critical community needs through campus community partnerships. This year, the Honor Roll will recognize institutions in 4 categories. An institution may apply to 1, 2, 3, or all 4 categories. Now let's talk a little bit about each of the 4 categories. Under the General Community Service category, institutions may support project examples in any area of community service. Some of the areas are listed on the screen, but this is by no means an exhaustive list. You will note that education and economic opportunity are listed, even while these areas are also individual categories this year. Please note that if your institution works on multiple community issue areas, rather than has a focus on a particular area, this may be the best category for you, as it will allow you to highlight projects that address multiple areas of community need. Alternatively, you may use this category to focus on a single issue, such as human trafficking, that does not have its own category under the Honor Roll. Under the economic opportunity category, institutions may submit projects that are assisting individuals or communities to improve their financial well-being and economic security. I'll share some examples of the types of projects that fall into the categories listed on your screen. For financial literacy, some of the projects might include financial literacy training, debt management or alleviation services, mortgage planning or foreclosure prevention services. For employment services, some projects might include job training or other skills development services, maybe resume preparation, interview skills, or job placement services. For food security services, some projects might include providing access to emergency food, such as food banks and food pantries, or support and services for alleviating long-term hunger and creating food security. For housing services, projects might include developing and repairing or making available housing for low-income individuals, families, or people with disabilities. Transitioning economically disadvantaged individuals, including homeless individuals, into safe, healthy, affordable housing. Other services of supports might include providing services to homebound older adults or people with disabilities to receive food, transportation, or social supports to live independently. Please note that an institution may submit multiple projects in one area. For example, 3 different projects addressing financial literacy, or may submit projects in several areas that all address economic opportunity. Under the education category, institutions may submit projects that improve educational outcomes for children and youth, from PK through undergraduate education. Some of these topic areas may include early childhood education issues such as social and emotional development for school-age children, academic readiness for school-age children. It may also include K-12 support services, including mentoring or tutoring to improve things like literacy skills, math skills, other areas of academic performance. Services that address risk factors such as attendance, engagement, or behavior problems, or services that increase high school graduation rates and prepare students for college preparation. Institutions may also submit projects that address post-secondary education, including access to college and college planning, or education about and access to financial aid services, or even supports for college success. So now I'd like to turn it over to Ken Bedell from the U.S. Department of Education to talk about interfaith community service.
Thank you, Rob. I want to start by pointing out that institutions that choose interfaith community service as one of their categories will still need to pay close attention to the quality of their community service. But how does interfaith community service differ? The primary difference between this category and the other 3 categories is that it adds a component of reflection for students on the foundation of commitment to community service. With interfaith community service, the institution provides an environment for students and community members to think about and engage others in reflection about why community service is important and the value systems in American society that are the foundation for commitment to community service. There's no cookie-cutter approach to interfaith community service. Every institution of higher education brings its own history and current resources. Some institutions have a highly diverse faculty and student body, where most community service work already involves students with motivations from a variety of value perspectives. Some institutions are grounded on a particular faith tradition, where interfaith engagement includes reflection on the faith tradition of the founders of the institution. Other institutions are located in communities with great diversity, so that community service generally brings students into interfaith environments. My point is that every institution has unique opportunities to expand, develop, and create quality interfaith community service programs. Now, Rob's going to describe the recognition levels.
So now that we've discussed the 4 categories that your institution can apply to the honor roll in, there are 4 levels of recognition on the honor roll. The baseline recognition level is the general honor roll level, and that's where institutions have met certain criteria, which we'll discuss later for all 4 recognition levels. There's honor roll with distinction, which is sort of the next step up from the general honor roll level, and finalists are pulled from the distinction list. And And then finally, there is the presidential awardees. For the presidential awardees, there will be one winner in each of the categories of the honor roll. And so now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Tracy Seabolt from here at the Corporation for National and Community Service.
Thanks, Rob. We're now going to talk about the application evaluation process. The first step in the evaluation process is the compliance check. Most institutions pass this compliance check. Those that do not are unable to move on to the next stage of the review process. To be compliant, you must submit your application by the deadline of April 3rd, 2014 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're outside the Eastern Time Zone, you should adjust the time to your local time zone. And if possible, I encourage you to submit your application well in advance of this deadline. You must also be an accredited degree-granting institution of higher education in the United States, and you must meet the minimum federal work-study community service participation rate if your institution participates in the federal work-study program. The U.S. Department of Education requires that an institution must use at least 7% of the sum of its total federal work-study funding for an award year to compensate students employed in community service activities. As the honor roll is a presidential award, an institution cannot be admitted to the honor roll if it participates in federal work-study program but does not meet this requirement. You will not enter this information on your honor roll application, however. The federal work-study information is reported to and verified by the United States Department of Education. It's important to note, however, that the data provided by the Department of Education is always one academic year behind the honor roll year. For example, this year's honor roll applicants will enter data from the 2012-2013 academic year on their honor roll application, but the most recent certified federal work-study data from the Department of Education at the time of our review will be from the 2011-2012 academic year. Please note that if your institution does not participate in the federal work-study program, you may still apply to be on the honor roll. The federal work-study requirement applies only to those institutions that participate in the federal work-study program. And again, if your institution participates in federal work-study, you must be above this minimum 7% or have a waiver from the Department of Education. Applications that do not meet these three compliance requirements are rejected and do not move on to the next stage. Applicants that pass the compliance check will be evaluated in three categories: institutional supports for service, institutional commitment to service statement, and exemplary project descriptions. I'll now spend some time reviewing those categories. All applications that pass the compliance check are reviewed to assess the institutional support for service. The institutional support for service comprises 60% of your application score. Since this is such a large percentage of the overall score for the application, this stage of the review process is what determines whether or not your institution is admitted to the honor roll. The scoring criteria in this part of the review are mainly about numbers, but the purpose is to demonstrate the institution's commitment through its investment in service. The honor roll recognizes institutions for which service is integral. There are 12 scoring criteria that are weighted and used to score each application. As you complete your application, please provide this information for your institution as a whole, not just those activities you are highlighting through this application. And we'll now review those criteria that make up the institutional support for service section of the review process. The first criterion reviews the percentage of total enrolled students engaged in community service activities. Student involvement in service is one component that reflects an institution's commitment to and support for service. Institutions that demonstrate a strong commitment to service have a higher percentage of enrolled students engaged in service. This demonstrates that service is an integral part of the student experience, in and out of the classroom. To accurately report this information, it is helpful to work with a team of people to gather this data on student service activities throughout the year. The second criterion looks at the percentage of enrolled students engaged in at least 20 hours of community service per academic term. To be on the honor roll, an institution needs to demonstrate that students are engaged in meaningful service. This criterion looks at the consistency of student service over the course of a semester. Institutions that are placed on the honor roll not only demonstrate that a high percentage of enrolled students are engaged in service, but that those students are committed to service as part of their student experience in and out of the classroom. The third criterion reviews the percentage of enrolled students who take service learning courses. For institutions that offer service learning courses, the percentage of students who are enrolled in those courses is another way an institution can demonstrate its support for service. The fourth criterion asks if service learning is required as part of the core curriculum of at least one major. This is a clear indicator of the extent to which the institution supports service activities. The fifth criterion asks if the institution rewards the use of academic service learning through faculty promotion and tenure decisions or other means. This criterion focuses on a faculty-wide view of how service is defined, promoted, evaluated, and rewarded within the institution's official recognition system. Does your institution reward academic service learning when considering faculty for promotions or tenure? Are there formal guidelines for documenting and rewarding community service and service learning? Are community-based teaching and research key components for hiring and rewards? Institutions that offer incentives to faculty for using service learning in the classroom demonstrate strong institutional support for service. If your institution does not currently incorporate rewards for the use of academic service learning through faculty promotion or tenure, you may want to consider this for the future. The sixth criterion assesses the percentage of federal work-study dollars spent on community service. Although the institution does not enter this figure, it is one of the criterion used in evaluating the institution's support for service. As we mentioned, in order to make the honor roll, the institution must meet the minimum federal requirement of spending at least 7% of its federal work-study allocation on community service placements. Higher scores are given for institutions that spend increasingly larger amounts of federal work-study dollars on community service. Again, this only pertains to those institutions that participate in federal work-study. The seventh criterion assesses if community service or service learning is cited in the institution's mission statement or strategic plan. Many higher education institutions include a desire to educate students who will create some mark in the world in their mission statements. Some take this a step further and include a desire that students engage in community-based as well as curricular education, or that students utilize their education in a way that will serve the community or improve society. Review your institution's mission statement and strategic plan. If community service or service learning is not referenced, what does this say about your institution's commitment to and support for service? If the commitment is there, the institution may want to consider referencing service in its mission statement or strategic plan. The eighth criterion asks, does the institution support at least one full-time staff member as a coordinator of student community service or service learning activities? The presence of a full-time staff member or the equivalent who is responsible for coordinating community service and service learning provides support to faculty and students, can help promote and sustain the institution's commitment to service, and demonstrate support for service. The ninth criterion assesses if the institution provides scholarships or other financial rewards for community service. Many institutions demonstrate their commitment by offering scholarships or other financial rewards for community service. In some cases, institutions offer scholarships to students who demonstrate a sustained commitment to service in high school. Institutions may also offer other financial rewards for community service, such as matching grants. The 10th criterion assesses if the institution matches the Siegel AmeriCorps Education Award. AmeriCorps members who successfully complete a year of service and sign up for an education award are eligible to receive a Siegel AmeriCorps Education Award. Students may use this education award to pay costs at qualified institutions of higher education, pay for educational training, or repay qualified student loans. Many colleges and universities match the Siegel AmeriCorps Education Award for their students. If you're unsure whether your institution offers these rewards, check with your institution's financial aid office and academic departments. The 11th criterion asks, does the institution make internal budgetary allocations to support service? Supporting service and service learning through hardline budget decisions is another way that institutions demonstrate their support for service. If the institution is not currently doing so, it might consider how it could use budgeting decisions to demonstrate its support for service. And the 12th criterion asks, is the institution recognized under the Carnegie Foundation's Community Engagement Classification? Colleges and universities with an institutional focus on community engagement may be recognized under the Carnegie Foundation's Community Engagement Classification. Unlike the Foundation's other classifications that rely on national data, institutions elect to participate in this classification by submitting required documentation describing the nature and extent of their engagement with the local or broader community. This approach enables the Foundation to address elements of institutional mission and distinctiveness that are not represented in the national data on colleges and universities. In order to be selected, institutions must provide descriptions and examples of institutionalized practices of community engagement that show alignment among mission, culture, leadership, resources, and practices. Institutions have the opportunity to apply for the Carnegie Foundation's Community Engagement Classification every 5 years. That brings us to the end of the second part of the review process, the institutional support for service. The 12 scoring criteria I just reviewed will determine whether or not an institution is admitted to the honor roll. Institutions with low scores on the institutional support section of the application will not be admitted to the honor roll. Median scores will be admitted to the honor roll but will not be further considered for higher honors. Applicants with high scores in this section will move on to be considered for the honor roll with distinction, Presidential Award finalist, and the Presidential Awards. The higher your institution scores, the more competitive its application. It's important that your institution's service data is aggregated and properly reported so it can be captured in the application.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. So at this point, we're going to have a question and answer section for the webinar. We've had some great questions come in. The first question is for Rob Beasy from the Corporation for National and Community Service, and it is, may we lump multiple initiatives together under the same category? Several on-campus reading literacy programs being highlighted under one narrative for education, for example.
Well, thank you, Ned. The good news is that for each one of the categories, there's space for you to enter up to 3 projects in your application. You may want to consider in your project narrative that note 2 things, that you have 4,000 characters in space and how much you can write, and then you also have, you want to make sure that you are covering all of the things that we're discussing in this webinar in your webinar. So if you're able to capture multiple projects in one narrative submission, all the more power to you. If you're not able to capture all of the the impact of your project and some of the other things that we've outlined in this webinar, you may want to consider breaking those projects up in your application.
Great, thanks, Rob. The next question is for Ken Bedell. In the faith-based focus area, there was conversation in the previous webinar about faith-based reflection incorporated into service activities, but the application talks about interfaith, which specifically talks about learning about or connecting with those faiths that are different from your own. Can you make the distinction?
I think I understand the question. The point of the award is to honor those schools that are not just talking about faith in relation to their community service, but actually engaging in interfaith dialogue related to their community service, or basing their community service on a broader understanding of interfaith commitment to service, or broad variety of faith perspectives. So a application that just had a group of Christians that went to work in a community service project at a Christian mission site and didn't have an interfaith component to it would not be scored as high as one that takes seriously the role of reflection and sharing across faith lines.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Our next question is for Tracy. Does the full-time staff member to coordinate student community service or service learning have to be dedicated to that work 100% of the time? Almost every school within the university has at least one person that works on this, but not every school may have this person solely committed to this job alone.
Great, thank you. The criteria, or the question is whether or not the institution has one full-time or the equivalent of one full-time. So if you have several people working on this across a number of different areas and it comes to a total of 100%, then that would be the equivalent. We realize that people are going to have varying responsibilities and they may not be focused on it 100%. We also realize that there's more than one person, most likely within each institution, that's going to focus on this. So it's going to be up to you to figure out what the exact percentage is and how you will address that question.
Great, thank you. The next question is, our center serves primarily undergraduate day students on campus, but as an institution, total enrollment would most likely include our growing online population. Do you calculate percentages using the total enrolled in our institution, which would include day campus, online, and continuing education? And either Rob or Tracy can answer that.
I mean, I think each institution is different in terms of how they determine who is their, who are their pool of students that sort of make up their total population of students. So, as more and more institutions enroll students in online courses or other alternative of means of education, I think you can use online education students as a part of your total population.
Bob, I'd like to say something about that, because we often get the question in relation to interfaith work, whether students that are online and actually are part of that or encouraged to be part of that. And at the Department of Education, we see online education not as something that kind of eliminates you from being part of a community of learning and from the broad spectrum of what it is to gain a higher education. And so that there are institutions, even I was in conversation with one institution of higher education that's entirely an online school that is engaging their students in interfaith community service and outreach as part of their program. So I hope that as institutions move into this area, they won't think that, online students don't have an interest in or participation in either community service or interfaith community service.
Great. Thank you. Another question that we've gotten a couple times, so that I wanted to ask, and that would be, are submissions of more than one project scored higher, and what factors go into scoring the projects? I know that we're going to touch on the projects a little bit later on, but the main question is, are submissions of more than one project scored higher? And that's for Rob or Tracy.
No, I think that what we're asking for you to do is to submit the best projects that you have available that are able to address the criteria or criterion that we have talked about today and that are listed in the guidance for the honor roll, so that and that there's going, and the reviewers, I mean, the scoring of those project narratives doesn't lower or increase your score if you only submit one project.
Great. Thanks, Rob. So this is the end of our first question and answer section. We're going to continue with the webinar. Again, another bit of housekeeping. All the questions submitted today will be posted on the honor roll submission site as an FAQ document. So if you submitted a question and we haven't gotten to it, there's lots of questions, and you can go to the application site to see the frequently asked question document and the answers to your questions. And with that, I would like to turn it back over to Tracy Siebold.
Thank you. The next section of the application evaluation process is the project narrative. This includes the institutional commitment to service statement, which encompasses 20% of your score, and the project descriptions, which encompass the final 20% of your score. Only those applications with high scores on the institutional support for service, the second part of the evaluation process, make it to the narrative stage. Some applicants will be admitted to the honor roll based on their score on the institutional support section. However, the score may not have been high enough to make it to the narrative review stage. This final stage of the review process determines whether an institution will be recognized with distinction or become a presidential award finalist, from which the presidential awardees are selected. At this point, there are 4 review teams, one for each category of the application: general community service, education, economic opportunity, and interfaith community service. Project narratives are extremely important during this stage of the review process. While the second stage of the evaluation process emphasizes numbers, this final stage looks at a different kind of data. The institutional commitment to service statement builds upon the institution's support for service and provides further background and context of the commitment. The statement should illustrate varied examples of how the commitment is demonstrated on campus and exemplified in campus community partnerships. Strong statements must include explanations of the commitment of institutional resources, how that commitment is implemented in the campus culture, academic programming, and extracurricular activities, the impact and effect of this commitment to service in the community, and how the institution uses assessment and evaluation to improve the quality of campus community partnerships and service activities. The final 20% of the honor roll application score is based on the project descriptions. For each award category, general community service or any of the other categories, applicants will select up to 3 service projects that exemplify the institution's commitment to service. These narratives should briefly describe specific projects that best illustrate the variety of activities in which the institution is engaged. Strong project descriptions must include all of the following: details of who participates in the service, for example, faculty, administrators, staff, students. It's important to note that staff and faculty participation should not include time for which they are paid, such as classroom instruction time, but only include that time that is volunteered. A description of the service beneficiaries. Are you serving K through 12 students, senior citizens, immigrants, low-income families, veterans, or other populations? A quantifiable description of the project benefits to the target population. What was accomplished as a result of the services provided? For example, did elementary students' grades improve by 20% as a result of tutoring? How many low-income families received free tax assistance, and how many received an unexpected refund in the form of an earned income tax credit? What kind of difference does or will the outcomes of service have on the lives of those who were served? How did the institution use assessment and evaluation to improve the quality of service? Describe the tools or methods used to evaluate the service and, if needed, make change or improvements to the service. Project narratives should also have a clear connection to the institutional commitment to service statement. If your institutional commitment to service statement focuses on environmental improvement, then projects should demonstrate that commitment. If the statement focuses on a particular group or neighborhood, your project should focus there. Details regarding the frequency of service. Do students participate during regular academic sessions, summer session, or other breaks? In order to create a real impact, there must be some consistency and frequency of service. Project descriptions should include information on the frequency of which service is provided by campus students, faculty, and staff. Finally, the project narrative should highlight your collaborations with the community agencies and other groups, including K-12 schools, who you are partnering with for service. Exemplary project narratives will also provide details related to each of the 3 criteria used to evaluate the descriptions. They include the scope of the project, evidence of project effectiveness, and impact on the community. When evaluating the scope, the breadth and depth of the project, reviewers will assess a number of factors, including the number of students serving, the amount of time they engage in service, the faculty and staff support for service, community collaborations, and additional factors shown on the screen. In addition to the scope, project narratives will be assessed for project effectiveness, the quantifiable outputs, such as the number of students tutored, and the community impact, the measurable community benefits, like the percentage of students whose grades improved after the tutoring intervention. I'll now pass the baton to Rob Beasley, who will review the evaluation process.
Thank you, Tracy. So let's review how the application evaluation process works. Institutions of higher education can apply to either or both a general community service or to any one of the categories or any combination of the categories. All applicants will first go through a compliance check. Those applicants that do not meet compliance will not be admitted to the honor roll, and their journey ends here. Still, many institutions make it through the compliance check and go into institutional support for service review phase. This is the phase that includes the 12 criteria we reviewed. There are 3 outcomes of this phase. Applicants with low scores on the institutional support for service will not be admitted to the honor roll. Median scores in this section of the review will be admitted to the honor roll, but will not be further considered for other honors. High-scoring applications will move on to the 3rd stage of review, project narrative. At this point, the 4 category teams review the project descriptions. Scoring in this area, combined with the level of federal work-study community service commitment, will determine if an institution will be admitted to the honor roll with distinction or be named a finalist or a presidential award winner. Ned?
Great. Thanks, Rob. So now we're going to have another Q&A session. And one question that keeps coming up is that if a project narrative is used in the general community service category, can it also be submitted for one of the other more specific categories?
Yes. So as I think we mentioned in the earlier discussions, each of the categories will be reviewed by a separate review team. So each category won't be reviewed by the same people. And so you could submit projects that are appropriate for that particular category. So it could be that in the general community service category, that encompasses the whole spectrum of projects that your institution could possibly do. The project that you would submit under education or economic opportunity should be specific for those particular types of service projects or to achieve those particular impacts or outcomes. For the interfaith category, you would want to make sure that your community service has that interfaith component. But you could also submit a project that has, if you submitted projects like related to economic opportunity, but that also had an interfaith community service component, you could submit that to either education or general community service or economic opportunity. So there are, you can definitely submit projects across, the same project across the category, so long as they fit into that particular category.
Great, thank you. Another question is, can unpaid internships by students in community organizations or NGOs be considered as part of the application if the institution is involved in arranging or supporting them?
Yes, as long as those interns are serving the community, and specifically the outside of the campus community as well, then yes, they can be counted.
Great, thank you. So this is a question, again, that has been asked a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. May we submit as one project more than one similar project? That is, could you submit a number of similar projects as a way to submit sort of one project?
Yes, you can if your institution elects to do that. Remember, though, that you have, for each one, the space that you have on the application to talk about in your narrative about a project, you have a limited amount of space. And we're asking for a lot of information for you to provide about a particular project. If you are able to fit all of that information into the space that we've allotted for you to submit your narrative, then you can definitely provide those projects.
Great. Thanks. So that's the end of this Q&A section. And again, just as part of housekeeping, all questions asked will be answered in the FAQ document, so you can go to the application website to get all of the answers. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rob Beasy to go through the application and submission process.
Great. Thank you, Ned. So as many of you know, or most of you know, that the application is available at our application website, which is myproject.nationalservice.gov/honor roll, as you can see on the screen. And the deadline for institutions to submit applications is April 3rd, 2014 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Applications submitted after that date and time will not be considered for the honor roll. And the review period for the applications will be starting April 4th through May 2014. And then the awards will be announced sometime in the fall. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ken Bedell for some additional information about the interfaith category in the Interfaith Challenge.
Thanks, Rob. Over 2 years ago, President Obama sent a letter to every college president challenging him or her to expand or develop a program of interfaith community service. Then he directed the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships to provide support and coordination to this effort. The result was the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge. Today, the President's Challenge has become a national community of learning with more than 500 institutions of higher education participating. With the support of the Department of Education, the Corporation for National and Community Service, and the non-federal partner, Interfaith Youth Corps, the President's Challenge provides resources, non-financial support for interfaith community service on campuses across the country. This includes an annual gathering in Washington, D.C., regional meetings to discuss interfaith community service, webinars, social media connections, and web resources. It's not required to apply for the honor roll to participate or sign up for the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge, But the Campus Challenge does provide an additional resource for institutions that are working on either expanding or initiating programs in interfaith community service. The following slide includes a web address where you can download a sign-up sheet to become part of this growing community of institutions committed to initiating and providing interfaith community service.
Great, thanks, Ken. This slide has a number of helpful websites as you are going through your application. The first website is nationalservice.gov/honor roll, which is the Special Initiatives website hosted at nationalservice.gov. The second link is the actual application site itself, myproject.nationalservice.gov/honor roll. The third is our Facebook community, where we invite you to post comments and ask questions and be involved in our conversation through social media. The fourth is the President's Interfaith and Community Service Campus Challenge participation form. And the last is the Carnegie Foundation's community engagement page. We really encourage you to visit all of these sites. They're very helpful in the application process. Additionally, we wanted to highlight a couple of the available resources on the application page itself. On this slide, you will see a screenshot of the application page, and we just wanted to point out a couple of interesting resources. You can see along the top, we have About the Honor Roll, resources that include fact sheets and our webinars, as well as our application guidance, which is important to read if you are filling out the application, as well as an FAQ tab. This slide shows our frequently asked questions and all the answers. These frequently asked questions come from our webinar, and this will be updated following today's webinar. So if you didn't have your question asked or you want to come back for clarification, please visit the application site and our frequently asked questions section. That concludes our webinar today. Thank you to all of our speakers and participants. And I think we have a little bit of time for a couple more questions. So I am going to find some ones here that were asked at the end. One of the housekeeping questions that's been asked a couple of times is, will this PowerPoint be available online? The answer is yes. It will be available both on the application page, and also it will be emailed to everyone who signed up to participate in this webinar. So a good question that has been asked a couple of times, and this is for Jackie Aker of the Corporation for National Community Service, is who usually completes this application at universities? Is it the service learning staff, PR people, advancement folks, etc.?
Well, our hope would be that it's all. So our recommendation is really to get the group together, because a lot of the information comes from different parts within the university. So I think it's good to work as a team to kind of represent all the different service disciplines at the university. Obviously, one person might physically input the information, but I think it's a great idea to pull the different teams together to have a robust application.
And to know that, you know, when you pull together that team, each office has a different perspective on the institution. So the community service office knows about the project and the way that students are out in the community and engaging the community. The marketing or public relations office knows how to take lots of content and whittle it down so that it's presentable in the limited space that we have available on the application. The president's office may have some language that they particularly want to make sure is included in the application so that it best represents what the institution is about. So I think all of these offices across your institution could add nothing but value to your application. And some of the best applications we've seen are applications that elected to use the different offices.
This is a two-part question. Can projects be submitted from a previous year? and/or is there a benefit to projects that have longevity over a number of years? So the first question to Tracy or to Rob is, can projects be submitted from previous years or previous honor roll applications? And then the second question would be, is there a benefit to projects that have longevity over a number of years?
The information that you're putting into this application is going to be for this academic year. If you're for the 2012-2013 academic year, yes, thank you. So if that's a project that has continued over many years and you entered it into last year's application and it's an ongoing project that was that took place during the time frame of this current application, then yes, you can enter that with the same the same project, but with the updated information as far as number of participating students and hours and faculty and staff. The second part of it.
You got it.
Oh, I got it both. Okay, good.
The next question is for Ken and for Tracy and for Rob. Is it a requirement that institutions considered for the honor roll with distinction meet at least the 15% of federal work-study dollars committed for community service?
Yes, that is one of the criterion for being able to get on the list for honor roll with distinction. However, there are other criteria that we mentioned in this webinar.
But one thing I'm still confused about that, if someone is not part of the program, do they still, then are they eliminated from receiving distinction? So if they don't have a work-study program?
No, they're not.
So this only applies to schools that have work-study, that participate in the work-study program.
So if you do not have a federal work-study program, the 15% does not apply to you.
Correct.
Great. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. Please, everybody, remember to visit the application site, and you can see this webinar again, and you will also be able to see the FAQ section. Thank you to all of our speakers and all of our participants. That concludes today's webinar.